Hello, everyone. Welcome into the first session of our four-part ITIL webinar series, Modernizing ITSM, How to Make ITIL Useful for You, presented by the Director of Americas at PeopleCert, David Cannon. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I will be assisting in moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the session. We do encourage participation throughout the session, so please use the chat or that Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, David.
Thank you, Mariela. Really good to be here again. Hi, everybody. I am going to jump straight in as we talk about how we modernize IT and ITSM. Of course, modernization is very broad. It covers the entire use of digital technology within the organization. So how do we use ITIL to make sure that we are dealing with challenges of the modern organization? And here's a spoiler for you. We are, of course, going to be talking about AI as well. So here's the agenda. What I'd like to do is look at where ITSM is today. I'm going to use some slides that I've used before. If you've been on other webinars, you may have seen a version of these. But this understanding of where we've come from and how we got there is very important for understanding how we need to move into the future. But very specifically, I want to look at how we're going to use ITIL. There are many approaches out there. All of them have something to offer. We're not saying that ITIL is the only way, but certainly ITIL has a lot to contribute, and I'd like to talk about what that is. So let's go straight into that. What is the current state of IT service management? And I'm going to look at a little bit of history as to how we got here and point out that in ITIL v1, when we talked about IT service management, we were really talking about a fairly straightforward organization. We were talking about an IT group that had operations and application development teams. And each of those teams was involved in providing services to the business. And we really just referred to it as the business. We didn't really go to too much trouble about distinguishing between different business units and their specific role in the organization. As far as we were concerned, they understood what they did. All we needed to do was to give them services that enabled them to do that better. So in ITIL v1, what we were interested in was this little circle over here, IT operations. Yes, we had some vendors, but we pretty much worked with them. We didn't tell vendors what to do and how to work with us. We took the equipment they gave us, we made it work for us, and we provided services to the business. We really didn't work together with, we worked together with application development teams, but the guidance and standards for application development were set outside of IT operations. So we really didn't have any insight into those or control over those. So ITIL in version 1, this was in the late 1980s, was developed really to answer the question, how do we manage IT operations? In ITIL v2, we still have the same situation, but by then the industry has changed a little bit. And by the end of 1990s, the whole client-server movement is in full swing. We've moved away from mainframes. We still have some mainframes sitting somewhere in the organization, but most of our work is done on client-server. And so ITIL v2 had to really focus on how do we deal with this more complex environment? And very specifically, how do we ensure that there is a level of quality when you have so many different working parts? So ITIL v2 extends the scope of service management to include a better understanding of how applications are developed, especially in the client-server environment, a better understanding of where the technology roadmaps are taking us, and also a better understanding of what the business is doing with the services, because we have the client end of client service sitting within the business. So we really have to understand how those clients are being used. So you see the scope of ITIL extending a little bit. In ITIL v3, a number of interesting things start to happen. We start seeing the world of application development and IT operations moving a little bit more closely together. We have joint teams that are focused on developing applications and services. We are still both supporting the businesses, but we're doing so more in concert. You start seeing approaches like DevOps becoming useful in organizations because we see this greater collaboration starting. And this is followed in ITIL as well. So we see ITIL now extending its reach well into the technology world as well as out into the customer environment. Why? Because by 2010, which is when ITIL v3 was released, we start seeing the business playing a lot greater role in articulating how they want to use information technology as part of their strategy. How do we differentiate ourselves using information technology? So if we want to be part of those decisions, we have to really understand not only how the business works, we also have to understand what kind of services and products they're delivering to their customers. We also started noticing that the world of technology was accelerating quite significantly, and that meant that we had to be more tightly linked with what was happening in the technology vendor world. So what was their roadmap? What were they doing? What new technologies were going to come out, which would change the way that we worked? So again, you see ITIL expanding, not, and I'm going to be clear about this, this is not because ITIL wants to or felt they should be controlling more. It was about ITIL saying, if we want to be effective as technology managers and leaders, we really have to understand more about how other parts of the organization and how other vendors are working. So therefore, we have to extend the practices that we use to include an understanding of these different components of the enterprise. And at that point, as you can see, not a huge amount of change in the way that technology is managed. You have an IT department. That IT department has app dev, it has IT operations, it works with technology vendors, and it provides services to the business. That has been consistent from ITIL 1, 2, through to ITIL v3. It was soon after ITIL v3 was released that the world started to change significantly, and the way that IT is managed started to change with it. So let's just take a summary of where we are in ITIL v3. This is kind of where ITIL v3 left us in terms of how we calculate our value as an IT department. In our enterprise or our organization, we have an IT department. That IT department provides a range of services to a number of business units. And by the way, in ITIL v3, we really also started recognizing that you have to understand that it's not just the business. There are very different, there are very big differences, significant differences between the way in which different business units work and the kind of services they need and the way in which they consume technology. So we started differentiating between the different business units, but essentially it's still the same. We have an IT department providing services to business units. In ITIL v3, the only official way to consume technology was through the IT department. It was all centralized. Anybody who tried to use technology or create technology outside of IT was called shadow IT, and it was viewed as a really bad thing, very strongly discouraged. That was the case back in the early 2000s. Now we still have the vendors, and we have to manage those. There are now more vendors creeping onto the scene. So we now have multi-vendor scenarios, and we have the challenge not only of understanding multiple business units and the differences of service between them, but we also have the challenge of understanding how to coordinate all of the different suppliers that we work with, because they're not these monolithic providers providing A through Z. They have now broken up and they've specialized in different areas, and we have to coordinate those. So a little bit more challenging, but still we have this basic flow through of the suppliers or vendors providing services to IT. IT provides services through to the business, and the business provides services through to our external customers. In terms of value, we create value. So in other words, we develop and deliver services that the business units can use, and they use them to make sure that our external customers get something valuable. When the external customers get something valuable, they pay us, or whatever the value agreement that we have. Usually it's commercial, which means they pay us. At that point, we realize value. It's not always financial. Of course, in government organizations, value is realized when you have completed an activity that is of service to the citizen. For example, you've produced a driver's license or a passport, or you have accepted a tax return. All of those may be considered valuable. So as soon as we achieve that objective, as soon as we've delivered that result, we have realized the value. And that was pretty straightforward, easy to calculate, although at the time we found it quite difficult. It's from here on that things started to get really complicated. And what complicated at first was the fact that, again, we see application development and IT operations growing even closer together. We see business units not really worrying about whether they're dealing with app dev or IT. They really just want to get the service. So they deal with us really in a combined way. But here's where the real issues started, and they started with this thing called the cloud. And the reason this created an issue for us was because you can purchase cloud services without the involvement of the IT department. Now, it's not always ideal to do that because you really need to take into account all of the aspects of managing technology. And if you don't really understand the technology, you may overlook some things, which certainly happened in the early days of cloud. So we have organization departments in the organization going out buying cloud services and then running into trouble and then calling on IT. So we had that situation. So there was still a relevant, the centralized IT department still had a very strong influence over the direction of the organization. But we find that a number of services that in V3 would have been provided by the IT department are now being provided by somebody outside the organization, somebody like Salesforce.com or Microsoft, who is selling services into the business. Well, in the case of Microsoft, they would usually come through IT, but in the case of Salesforce, they were sold directly to the sales director or the chief revenue officer. They were not sold to the IT department. So we have the role of IT starting to change. And we have other situations happening as well. We have enterprise cloud solutions coming in, things like storage, or as I mentioned, Office 365, for example, that's used by everybody. And those are acquired and sometimes acquired centrally, sometimes acquired by a business unit, sometimes acquired by a group of business units. But the whole point of this is that every time you see one of these cloud symbols outside the IT group, it means that a decision is being made and management activities are being undertaken that do not necessarily involve IT. What that means is that the IT department starts to shrink a little bit. The role of the IT department starts to shrink. Now, it doesn't end there because in the business, we start seeing business units developing their own applications to do things. Some of these applications purely internally, these could be, for example, data reporting applications. They could be operations automation happening within the business unit. But the point here is that they've developed them and they're managing them. So we now have small IT groups, not part of the IT department, but emerging within the business units. And they're managed by the business unit lead, not by the IT director or the CIO. Some of these products that are developed by multiple parts of the organization, on product teams. So we have different business units grouping together to create products, and sometimes they'll use people from app dev, and sometimes they'll use people from IT operations, and they'll create these multifunctional teams, and they'll develop projects or products using agile methodologies, for example, that then result in applications that reside both inside and outside the organization. For example, mobile apps or data consolidation services such as the financial industry uses. So we see a huge amount of, or a significant amount of work being done around using and managing and developing digital technology services. It's happening outside of IT. So ITIL really has to address this, and it does so in ITIL 4 by really taking everything that we learned from 1 through 3 and applying it into this new environment. Now, I've seen a lot of people take the ITIL books and they say, oh, yeah, I paged through it and I see that somebody mentioned Agile there. So the only real difference between ITIL 3 and 4 is the fact that they incorporated some Agile language and some DevOps language. That is absolutely not true. ITIL 4 is fundamentally different. ITIL 4 is designed specifically to allow technology users and decision makers to manage that technology throughout the organization, whether they're sitting in IT or whether they're sitting in another part of the organization. Now, sometimes that works really well. We do it in a really coordinated fashion, like you see on the slide. But in other cases, we see organizations saying, yeah, we're going to use ITIL, but we see different parts of the organization starting to use different bits and pieces of ITIL in different ways. So we see a service desk. They're going to be using incident and maybe problem management, but a service request management, perhaps. They'll have a service catalog. We have a network operations center supposedly supporting the same technologies, but with a completely different set of objectives and monitoring tools, event reporting and correlation, and that may or may not even interface with incident management on the service desk. They may have actually created their own incident management procedure. Then we have an HR service desk that's using some of the ITIL guidance under an approach called enterprise service management. And then the product teams say, you know, we're really good with Agile and DevOps on the product team, but in terms of interfacing with other groups in the organization, we like to use ITIL as part of the QA to make sure that we're including everybody. So they have their own view of ITIL, and you can go on and give examples of this. The real issue with this is not that people are using ITIL. That's great. The real issue is they're using it in a disconnected way. And that's not really solving the problem of just technology being used all over the place in an uncontrolled way. It creates all kinds of governance issues. It creates all kinds of quality issues. And the way that these organizations are using ITIL doesn't actually solve that. So we'll talk a little bit later about how to solve this problem, because that's part of modernization, right? You can modernize by buying new technology. That's great. But you have to be able to manage it. And you have to be able to use it in a way that supports the organization's objectives. That's really the result or the goal of modernization. It's not just to have the latest and greatest, it's to increase the effectiveness and the efficiency of your organization. And if you cannot do that, you really haven't modernized your organization at all. So what you're looking at on this slide is an organization that is using a number of modern technologies. They're using a number of modern working methods, but they really have not modernized the enterprise at all, because they're dysfunctional and they're not actually achieving their objectives in the best possible way. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing to recognize in ITIL is that the way we calculate value or track value in ITIL is different in ITIL 4. And it's different for some very important reasons. Let's go through what it looks like. So first of all, as I've said, the use and management of digital technology has spread throughout the organization. If you look at each of these units, notice I didn't call them IT and business units. I simply called them organization units. Some of them are very strong in IT. This one here, for example, on the left, has a strong kind of purple flavor to it. That is, that's a department that is really focused. More than 80% of its effort is focused on managing actual technology and has very strong technology skills. That may be the traditional IT department. That may be the shared services unit within the organization. Here, on the other hand, we see these three in the middle, very strong on business operations. That's the orange, but very, much lower technical capabilities. They're still there, but they're not a major feature. Those technical capabilities are, we know how to use the services and the applications that we get from the cloud. We understand, how to use our laptops and the applications on the laptops. We're really good at Office 365. We're really good at ChatGPT. So we got all those skills down. But really, our focus is not on managing those things. It's on achieving some sort of business operations. It could be sales, it could be manufacturing, but you're dealing with business operational skills. So it's a combination of digital technology and business operation at work in those organizational units. This one here on the end is kind of even. We have both technology and business operation skills. This is a good example of, for example, digital marketing. Works very much like this. Very strong on technology use, very strong on business operations. The point here is that all of us are using technology. So how do we make sure that we're getting the most out of that technology? How do we make sure that we're using it in the right way, that we're managing it correctly, that it's being used effectively, and that we're not duplicating effort or investment? Well, the way we do that is by pulling together all of these disparate components into a focus. And that focus is called the value stream. The value stream, if you like, is the things you do to create value in the organization. It runs typically across multiple organizational units. It uses more than one type of technology, and it involves more than one process. So value stream, for example, is I have received an order from a customer for a product. I am able to find that product in the warehouse. I can collect that product, deliver it to the user, and get paid. There's an example of a value stream that is covered by multiple business units and multiple technologies. The point here is that if you don't understand the value stream, then the best you can do is make sure that your department is working the best it can. The best you can do is make sure that the technology that you manage is working well. Whether it achieves what it's supposed to achieve, we don't always know, unless we've defined that value stream. So value stream is a way of bringing together all of these different bits and pieces all through the enterprise and making sense of how they fit together. Now, in the modern organization, we don't only have employees working in organizational units, we also make strong use of partners from outside the organization. These are people who have skills that we need, but there are too few of them to hire them, or maybe they're so specialized we don't want to invest in that skill long term. We just need them for a short period of time, but they're almost an employee of the organization. They act as employees of the organization, and they partner with us to create and deliver value. The old processes that we're familiar with are still there. I mean, just because we have these value streams and just because we're using new technology doesn't mean that things don't break. Things still break. And in fact, the more you have, the more they're going to break. And the more new they are, the more they're going to break and the more you have to learn. So incident and problem management is still really important. Change management is still very important. Will they work the same way they did in ITIL v3? No, they actually work very differently. So anybody who says, well, ITIL 4 is just ITIL v3, with a nice integration of some agile concepts. No, that's not what it is at all. ITIL 4, incident, problem, and change management work very differently to the way they worked in ITIL v3. Yes, they have to be more agile, but in addition to that, they have to be able to work within these highly diverse environments where you have multiple people and multiple groups that are responsible for different aspects of the technology. So it does look very different. Yes, we still have our vendors. Many of those will now become commodity suppliers. Used to be, if you wanted a server, you had to be very clear about what kind of server you wanted. Today, most of the servers we use are in the cloud and they're pretty standardized. So if they're standardized, why do we have to go through the whole thing of design? And I mean, all we need to do is specify what we need and order it. So we have a very different way of managing suppliers that we did in ITIL v3 because of the complexity of the organization. So here's the first thing that I want to say about how ITIL will help you to modernize your organization. It helps you to articulate the fact that you can link together all of the diverse components of your organization in a way that you can track how value is created and delivered. And that's essential for an organization to be successful. So we play a really important role of being able to map the technology that's being used, who owns and manages it, and how does it contribute to the value of the organization. That's a key skill that we as service managers need to have. And that means being able to work across multiple business units. It means that we have to leave our comfort zone of that central IT department, service desk, or engineering team and start working across the organization to understand how the technology pieces all fit together. So if your ITSM processes were designed before 2019, and I'm assuming for many people on the call that many of you kind of came into an organization and the incident management and problem management process were already there. In fact, many of you will be working with those processes and they don't even mention ITIL at all. If they were developed before 2019, chances are, I'm not 100% confident that they will be, but I'm pretty sure at about an 80 to 90% level, they were probably designed for managing a central IT department. That's where they came from. So your incident and problem and change management processes, if they were designed before 2019, were developed in an environment where you had a central IT department, and that was the only one providing services to the enterprise. You're probably already discovered that those processes don't work as well in an environment where multiple business units have a stake and decision-making power over the technology that they use. Now, if they did use ITIL to develop those processes, the only version of ITIL before 2019 was ITIL v3 or ITIL v2 that they would have used. Those are not appropriate for designing practices that address the concerns of a modern workplace. They're very appropriate for centralized IT departments, but they really don't translate very well once you start moving into other parts of the business where technology decisions are being made. The third thing is if your ITSM processes were designed before 2019, usually they were designed purely for the IT operations groups. That's infrastructure, engineering, maybe some database administration, network management, and so on. You may find that using those processes in your organization, you're struggling to interface or interact or integrate with the development team life cycles. Even if they're using DevOps, which are designed very closely to link with the operational procedures, you'll find that the processes you've defined will include really that traditional centralized IT mindset in which development and operations are kept separate. So it can be very challenging to bring those teams together again using those processes. So also, I think one of the things we have to acknowledge is that digital technology groups use ITIL differently. I already covered that, the yellow circles on the slide. So some of them will take the processes you've developed and apply them in their organization. Some of them will use ITIL, but develop something different. Some of them will have used a different framework. They may have used DevOps, they may have used Agile, they may have used something out of that they discovered out of ISO or somewhere else. Some may have developed their own solutions without any framework at all. They just kind of came up with something that works for them. Great. But it's very difficult to get them to communicate across all of these different frameworks. So really important, if you want to really make the most of modernizing your organization, you have to get everybody speaking the same language. Now, it doesn't really matter to me or anybody else, whether it's ITIL, whether it's DevOps, whether it's Agile, it doesn't really matter where the language comes from. But I think what you'll find is that you'll need multiple sources. You will need some of it coming from Agile, you'll need some of it from DevOps, and you'll need some of it from ITIL. And you'll need to map these to each other. That's a really important exercise if you're going to be working across multiple technology environments. So there's a little key buried in there. If you want to modernize, you need to become conversant in more than just ITIL. You need to be able to translate between frameworks. But don't start with no framework because that quickly gets confusing. So, summary of where we are. Where is ITSM today? The management of IT is decentralized. Digital technology, the nature of digital technology means that it has been used differently in different parts of the organization, which means the organization has become more fragmented. If you work for a central IT department, it's great. By the way, I'm not knocking central IT departments. They're really important as providers of shared service and as a way of maintaining consistent, for example, security standards. Really important work. But please understand that you are only managing a percentage of the total IT investment in the organization. And a lot of what's happening in IT is happening outside of the centralized IT department. Now, the problem comes when the centralized IT department ignores those things. It's really important to understand where they are, what they're doing, and to link to them so that you can create your value streams. Development and operations teams and the processes they use are moving closer together, and that will continue to happen. Especially with AI, you're seeing a lot of the functions that meant that we had to have two very separate teams that worked very differently. AI is making it possible to remove some of those constraints and collaborate more. So we're able to move some of the more routine and well-known use of, for example, coding and operations management and monitoring. We're able to move that into AI and focus more on the things that really add value to the organization. Sorry for the typo there. Organizations need consistent governance of IT. Now, that doesn't mean rigid control of IT. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is the fact that there needs to be some sort of common understanding about how we use technology in the organization. And if we're going to have different teams using different technologies going in different directions, somebody has to orchestrate that. Somebody has to understand how they all fit together. That's where we come in. That's a really important role of IT service management, is being able to connect the dots. One other very important thing that's happening is that the term ITSM has become a little bit limited. It's not only IT and it's not only services. As the world of development and operations grow closer, we're now having to think about both services and products. as we invest in modern technology, we're not only thinking about information technology, we're thinking about broader applications of technology that are more digital. Think of things like Internet of Things. Think of things like operational control systems. These are all now becoming part and parcel of the task of managing the organization with digital technology. So the term that we're starting to see becoming more and more prevalent is this term called Digital Product and Service Management, or DPSM. So you're going to see the industry moving away from ITSM as a discrete practice that is limited only to the IT department, to this enterprise practice, which covers anybody who uses digital technology, and that is called digital product and service management. And you will start to see, we already see this in ITIL v4. You're going to start seeing this expanding in as the practice guides are updated and so on. You're going to see more and more reference to this term DPSM. So how did ITIL get us to today in this whole thing? And I want to point this out because some of us are still kind of using these old versions. This one here, vendor manuals. You want to understand how to manage technology, look at the vendor manual. Go on a cloud architecture course. That's great. Let AWS, Azure, or Google tell you how to manage the technology. They're not going to tell you how to get value out of it for your organization, but they will tell you how to manage the technology. And that's exactly where ITIL started. But the point is, you have to manage technology to achieve something. There's an objective involved. And ITIL started to define what that objective was. The first objective was, how do we manage operations? The second one in version 2 was, how do we manage quality of services? In ITIL v3, it was, how do we make sure that we can measure the value of the services that we provide? And at this point, we're still seeing IT as a service provider. With ITIL 4, IT still has some elements of service provision, but it now becomes a broker of capabilities because there is more than one service provider in the organization. So the role of the service manager is not just about managing IT services, it's about understanding how we get the right capabilities to deliver value for the enterprise as a whole. So that's what ITIL 4 is about. In ITIL 5, if we ever get there, I hope we'll get there, because that means that that we've been able to apply ITIL further. We will start talking about business embedded IT, or business embedded digital technology, where the solutions are developed and managed within different units within the organization. Now, ITIL 4 has already started down that road. I think as we update the practice guides in ITIL, you will start seeing a lot more reference to business embedded IT. Now, ignore what I said about ITIL 5. We have no idea whether ITIL 5 is coming or not. That's just my wishful thinking. But I do think that if we do have an ITIL 5, that's exactly the direction that it will be headed. So how did it do this? Well, what ITIL did is it identified a set of core capabilities for managing digital technology, and that happened in ITIL v1. It said things like, well, if something breaks, you got to be able to fix it. That's basic, right? It happens in whether you're using a laptop or whether you're using a cloud service. Something breaks, you got to know how to fix it. If you change something, you have to know what you changed and whether it caused any impact. That's standard. It doesn't matter what technology environment you're looking at, that's standard. So ITIL identified those core capabilities. Now, managing incidents, problems, and changes, as I've said, in a mainframe environment is very different to managing them in a distributed environment or managing it in an AI-enabled environment. So you can't say, well, yeah, okay, so I've got the core capabilities in version 1, that's all I need. No, they change. So what ITIL, the custodians did, that's a bunch of authors, researchers, the community, is they continuously monitor the industry for changes. And they incorporate those changes into the framework. Oh, yeah, we've seen that incident management works very differently in an environment where multiple teams are collaborating on a project. Let's write about how that works. And so you'll find that included in the incident management practice guide. More importantly, every time there's an industry shift, the creators and custodians of ITIL research how organizations dealt with that. So we move from mainframe to client server. We move from client server to web. We move from web to mobile. We move from mobile to machine learning and artificial intelligence. Every time we make a shift like that, we have to understand how do we apply all of these capabilities in that new environment. And that's where every new version of ITIL comes along. So core capabilities have remained in place, but how they're used and managed has changed significantly. So what role, here's some examples of how that's changed. I'm not going to go into detail here. You can certainly look at this, but you can see 1980s and 90s, IT supported some of the business processes by managing IT systems. In 2000s, IT supports and enables some business processes through delivery and support of IT services, not management of systems alone. 2010s, we support business strategy and business development, not only the processes, and we become a strategic partner. We start using the applications that have been developed as competitive differentiators. In the 1980s, enterprise resource management was something somebody dreamed of. By the 2010s, by the 2000s, certain companies were using it to do better at manufacturing and distribution than others. By 2010s, everybody has ERP or ERM in place. 2020s, based on digital technology. And this is where we are right now. This digital technology is emerging, it's changing, it's disrupting. Our role as IT leaders and as IT service managers or digital product and service managers is to understand what that disruption means for the business and how we can get through it as effectively and efficiently as possible with benefit to the business. So there you go. There's some examples of the kind of systems that were used. Now, there is an example of this. We looked at moving to the cloud, and some of the early cloud providers made the statement that cloud is so wonderful, you won't need service management in the cloud because it's all built in. Well, we found very quickly that that's not the case. We found that the top 4 issues in moving to cloud, and I've listed them here, this is backed by various sources of research, which is security concerns, governance concerns as to who can buy and make decisions about cloud, the unpredictability of cost of cloud, which is a problem even until today, and misaligned operating models. These are the 4 biggest issues in managing cloud services, and they exist today. The way to solve those issues is by using service management processes. Some of them you'll find in ITIL, and they work very well. Some of them have been developed specifically for the cloud. For example, if you look at financial management, we see FinOps being developed specifically to apply financial management into the cloud environment. But there's a really good example of the service management practices that are helpful in resolving the challenges of moving to a new technology. And you'll find exactly the same thing as we move into AI. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about AI and the strategy of your organization. Traditionally, this is ITIL v3, and previous to that, we have this approach to strategy, right? Somebody defines a strategy, usually the executives and board of directors, maybe the CIO, they define a strategy and they communicate that strategy to their direct reports. Those direct reports create strategic initiatives. Those strategic initiatives will result in a new set of business operations. And it works very strictly top down. It takes at least 1 year and up to 5 years for this strategy cycle to be completed. It's really great. Now we have digital technology. We don't have 1 to 5 years to figure out what's going to happen next. Before you've even started thinking about implementing one technology, the next one is coming along. So what we have in digital technology is we have this view of strategy. There you have the strategy, strategic initiatives, business operations. Those layers still exist. But what's really interesting is that we're continuously monitoring these environments all the time. What's changing? What's different? What's happening? Are we still going in the same direction? Is that direction still the best direction? Has a new technology come along that's going to change that? Here's the really interesting thing is, of course, there's your agile loops. Great. We've introduced those because we have to think and move very quickly. What's very interesting is we expect changes to the strategy to come in the strategy layer. So somebody does some investigation and they see, oh, this has changed. Oh, let's think about that from a strategy point of view. Oh, yes, let's include it in the strategy. That still happens. But here's something else that's happening. Here we have a strategic initiative. We start implementing it, and suddenly we realize that there's something new. So we started, ChatGPT, and we're going with ChatGPT 4, and we're implementing that. That's going to be part of our strategic initiative. Well, before you know it, 5 comes along and it works completely differently. It has completely different ways of sourcing data and reporting that data. It uses different data. Well, now we got to rethink our whole strategy based on whether that is still the right choice for us to use. Even more, changes to the strategy can happen here at the business operation layer. Somebody has turned on Copilot on their desktop. They start using it to automate the job that they do. Well, suddenly that job, wow, we can do that? Yeah, we can. Why don't we create a product and sell that product to our external customers? Suddenly that change that was made by this individual using Copilot on their laptop now becomes the source of a brand new line of products or services that we can sell externally. Changes the whole strategy of the organization. That happened quite a lot, by the way, when cell phones and iPads were introduced into organizations. It really changed the way in which organizations worked. And I can tell you now, most of those organizations didn't start at the top by looking at cell phones and iPads. Those strategy changes came because somebody brought those things to work and started doing things with them. And somebody said, whoa, that's cool. How do we do that? Strategy. So the point here is you want to modernize the organization. You need a way to be able to link business operations, strategic initiatives, and the strategy of your organizations and be able to move between them very quickly. All of us as technology managers or even individual contributors, all of us have a role to play in this. Now, I do have a poll. What does this have to do with AI, ITSM, and digital transformation? Great question. And it's all about how we adopt, manage, and use digital technology. I'm going to ask Mariella if you could put the poll up there. I've given you, how's your organization using AI most today? Just choose one of them. You may be doing several of these things, but which is the thing you're doing most today? We can just take a couple of minutes just to complete that. Yeah, great. So if 18 people answered, I know there's still some more coming in, but this is exactly mapping to the surveys that we've done here in PeopleCert. Really good. This is exactly, in fact, you'll see I'm going to put a figure up there and my figure matches these proportions pretty well. This is exactly what's happening in the industry right now, is that we see a lot of individual use of artificial intelligence. We see a little bit less of optimizing processes like incident management. We see very little being done in the way of strategic thinking. So, great. I'm going to move on from there. Thank you very much for everybody that contributed. I can share the results. There we go. So you can see there. Right. Let me stop sharing that and move on. What you said, it corresponds exactly with what we've discovered. And here we go. How are organizations using AI? Well, here's how they're using it. The primary use of AI today is day-to-day operations. It's Copilot, it's ChatGPT, it's Gemini, it's whatever tool you want to throw at it. But we're releasing these tools to individuals to figure out how they can increase their productivity. That's what we're doing. The secondary use, and there's still quite a number of people using this, but a much smaller number, is how do we use AI to help us manage and optimize processes and the way that we manage work? How do we measure? How do we measure performance? How do we optimize workflows? There's definitely a lot of work there, and I personally would put the chatbots and agentic AI somewhere between day-to-day operations and management. They certainly go between those. But again, by far the bigger use of chatbots and agentic AI, it goes down to improving day-to-day operations and then looking at how to improve management and workflows. Fewer organizations use AI to introduce new business opportunities, come up with ideas to compete better or to change your organizational designs. And very few organizations, the only reason it's this big is because I couldn't fit ecosystem into a smaller box. It's very small. These are the high-level disruptors. These are the Googles, the Ubers, the Amazons, etc. of the world. These are the people who are going to use AI to fundamentally change the way that the world works. Now, if you look at a digital startup, you'll probably see that the sequence of these is reversed. They're using it to try and change the ecosystem. They're using AI as part of their strategy. Yes, they're doing AI in management, and yes, it helps them to day-to-day management, but the primary focus is on the top two. For the rest of us, this is pretty much what it looks like. Now, interestingly, here's what we would call these things. So if you want to transform things at the bottom level, you're using AI to transform procedures, activities, and operations. If you're using it at management, you're using AI to transform process, product, and services. If you're using AI at strategic, you're using AI to change or transform business and operating models. So when we talk about digital transformation in AI, it's really important to understand what level of use you're introducing and what level of transformation you're hoping to get out of this. Very important as service managers or digital product and service managers, what we need is a way to link the layers. It's all very well to give everybody access to Copilot and ChatGPT, but you've got to be able to very quickly pick up the successful use cases so that you can replicate them and make them part of the efficiency and effectiveness of your organization. Now, I've included a bunch of slides, and New Horizons on request will send you a copy of these slides. What I've done here is I've actually shown you as a professional what kind of role you would play as a service management or digital and product service manager. What kind of role would you play in transforming the ecosystem? How would you use ITIL? What would you need to do to grow your career in this direction? And what specifically do you need to learn from ITIL? So I've done this for each of the 4 layers. So take a look at your organization and figure out which of these 4. And I'm not going to cover each of them. These are for your reference. I would love for you to take these away, just look at them, and then do 2 things with them. 1, assess your organization. How do you use ITSM? Which ITIL practices do you use? Are they up to date or were they developed before 2019? Who else manages digital and IT products in your organization? Do they interface with your group? Do you interface with their group? So this is just a quick self-assessment you can do. And as a hint, please don't try and assess the entire enterprise all at once with all 34 ITIL practices. Start with 1 or 2 that have the most impact for you. Could be incident management, could be service level management, could be service design. Whatever is important for you and how you interface with other groups, start there. And by the way, you have the tools to do this. If you have a practice guide, chapter 7 of the practice guide, every one of the practice guides has a set of metrics or measurements that you can use to determine how well you're performing that practice. Step 2, assess your personal career goals. Where do you want to be? Do you want to continue to be part of a centralized IT group? It's a great career path, by the way, but know that you will be focused on shared services. You'll be looking at enterprise security, you'll be managing programs, and you'll be focused on governance. In other words, orchestrating the use of digital technology through the organization. Great career direction, but you have to be very clear about that's the way you want to go. Alternatively, do you want to be embedded in your organization's business, developing and or managing digital products and services? That's another career direction, different set of skills. Third, do you want to be a technical specialist? You maybe want to focus in on becoming the AI specialist within your organization, but maybe you want to join the dots between different parts of the organization. Again, two very different skill sets. The hints here, first of all, no matter which direction you choose, you need to keep your technical skills up to date. Whether it's network management, AI tool management, whatever it is, ServiceNow management, whatever tool you want to mention, you'll need that expertise. You do need ITSM or DPSM skills. No matter which one of these steps you focus on, there'll be different skills, but you will need those skills. Use the tables on slide 25 to 28 as a guide on where to focus. And then once you've done that, step 3, get help. You may not need help, but if you're anything like me, you probably will. There are a number of resources. Of course, we're on the New Horizons call here, so you want some training, contact New Horizons. You need some consulting help, get hold of somebody who uses the language. Don't just get hold of anybody who has some bright ideas about digital technology. Get somebody who understands the language of service and product management. And then third, you're always welcome at any time to contact me. Easiest way is LinkedIn. And from LinkedIn, you can get access to email and so on. But that's the easiest way. I'm going to end off with the ITIL 4 courses coming up. Here are some dates. They're available on New Horizons website. If you want to, these are the foundation courses. By all means, take a look. These are guaranteed to run if you want to get onto one of those. And that ends the formal presentation. I think we have 2 minutes left for Q&A. Apologies for running a bit long there.
No worries at all, David. I went ahead and dropped those links for reference in the chat if they want to learn a little bit more about ITIL Foundations or any other topic. So please feel free to click on those links or throw any last minute questions in the chat. But it was a info-packed session, and we had a lot of great feedback. We had a comment here from Danny saying this is all awesome. I cannot wait for the next 3 webinars. So that is another perfect way to just remind everyone in the session that if you were not aware, this is a 4-part series that David will be joining us for the next month about ITIL. So we'll be diving deep into all things ITIL. So if you want to take a deeper dive into what the next sessions will look like in the next month, please feel free to click there. But besides that, I think that'll do it for us today, David. So I wanted to take a second to thank our amazing audience. And of course, you, David, this is a lot of fantastic info.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, everyone, have a fantastic rest of your week. Thank you all so much for joining us, and hopefully, we'll see you all very soon in the classroom. Bye for now.